Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for that great introduction. Speaking of introductions, usually when I'm in South Carolina, I usually start out every speech I give by introducing a couple of people. My two boys, John and Daniel. I'm proud of all my children, but in South Carolina, I'm particularly proud of these two guys. John and Daniel are sophomores and juniors at the Citadel down in Charleston. So you can tell from the last campaign, South Carolina had a big impact on Karen and me. We are very proud Citadel mom and dads and love that institution. But they are not here today. They are with my older daughter, Elizabeth, who many of you got to know 4 years ago. And they are in Columbia. You might notice the garnet palmetto tie. I know that's a risky thing in a Jeff Duncan crowd. But my niece is graduating from USC today, and so they are at her graduation. I will say, for the benefit of those in orange and white, that my son is bright enough to have established a relationship and is dating a girl from Clemson right now. So I just went, there you go. I'm very proud of my boys. I'm very proud of my two boys at the Citadel, and one of them is going to be going this summer to field training. He is contracted with the Air Force. Very proud of him and his decision to serve in our military. People ask me, thank you. People ask me all the time, you know, why are you considering running for president? And one of the first reasons I can think of and I believe is because I think it's time we have a president that honors and supports the American military. I also think it's time that we have a president who doesn't appease and play word games in defining our enemy, that is very clear, forthright, and honest with the American public about the multiple threats that confront this country from China, Russia, and yes, radical Islam is confronting this country. Heck, I would just be happy if the president would be able to tell the difference between our friends and our enemies. Let me give the current president, a little primer. Iran, enemy. Israel, friend. It's important for anybody who's thinking about running for president to have a vision, to articulate that vision for the American public as to how we're going to keep America free and safe. That's important. But it's also important to have policies that back it up so we can communicate and articulate a vision that's backed up by real strength. Over the last several years, I've been very, very clear, and in fact, I've been clear for about the last 10, 12 years about the threat of radical Islam. I have been one who has actually even lectured a previous president on saying that this isn't a war on terror, but it's a war against radical Islam. Terror is a tactic. Islam is an ideology, and we need to be honest with the American public about who the nature of our enemy really is. And what I believe we need to do is to confront the two great threats in the Middle East that confront us today. First, ISIS. We have to have a plan, and what the president has is a public relations stunt. He is sending sorties, airplanes to bomb. He's got a few advisors in place. But do you know the handful of sorties that we fly every day, most of them come back not having dropped their ordnance? Oh yeah, they're flying over there, but they're not doing anything there. He just wants to be able to report to you that he's doing something. Here's what we need to do. We need to ramp up. If these folks want to bring back a 7th century version of Islam, then my recommendation is let's load our bombers up and bomb them back to the 7th century. we have to be very clear that we actually do need to arm the Kurds so they have the ability to fight back and take back their territory. We have to support the Jordanians. And by the way, we need to get Iran, who is now doing the proxy fighting for Iraq, we need to get the Iran and their special forces the heck out of Iraq, and we need to put forces in there, including some American forces, who can work with the Sunnis in Iraq to drive ISIS out of Iraq immediately. Now that's a plan. That's a plan, and that's a vision, and that's something that can be executed and measured by. I put that plan out there, and a few weeks later, I find myself in a magazine. Not necessarily a magazine that anybody in public life or thinking about getting back into public life loves to see yourself in a magazine, right? Well, not necessarily this one. It was ISIS magazine. Yeah, I was under the heading, "In the words of our enemy," with my picture. I would add that President Obama's picture was not under "in the words of our enemy." What were my words? I identified who they were, and I told the world how to defeat them. That makes me an enemy. But that also makes you a leader that they're worried about. Right? Second major threat, I would argue, and I have argued for 10 years, 12 years, the bigger threat. Even during the Iraq War, I argued this. The bigger threat is a nuclear Iran. I asked a former head of the CIA what kept him up at night just a few weeks ago, and he said, a nuclear Iran that could launch an electromagnetic pulse bomb if they get a nuclear weapon. Back in 2004, ladies and gentlemen, I authored a bill called the Iran Freedom and Support Act. It was a bill that put sanctions on the Iranian nuclear program, and when I authored it, I couldn't get a single co-sponsor. No one was worried about Iran. Eventually, 2 years later, we fought, got it on the floor of the Senate. It was defeated on the floor. And who stood up and voted against me? Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. But 6 months later, we passed that bill unanimously. It is now the sanctions that you hear about that are crushing Iran, that brought them to the table. I was the author of a lot of those sanctions. I know a lot of you, because I am too. I've been out of public life now for several years. I'm frustrated when I hear people get up, and there will be on this stage a lot of really good people who have a lot of great rhetoric, and even some will have a few specific plans. But then they go to Washington, D.C. You've elected some of them, not very many here in South Carolina, but some, certainly across this country, who say all the right things at campaign time and then go to Washington, D.C. and do something completely different. So how do you know who to trust? Look at their record. Look at what they've been saying, not just for this election or for this campaign, for this speech sometimes. But look at what their record has been, not just the last year, but the last 10, 15, 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen, Commander-in-Chief is not an entry-level position. We need someone who has experience that you can trust, and how do you trust them? By looking at their record. Looking at someone who has stood up and fought, who opposed a previous president when he wanted to negotiate with Iran. Why? Because Iran will never keep anything they ever promised to do. So we need to understand that experience and a track record are vitally important. I would add one other national security issue that doesn't get talked about a lot as a national security, but it is, as we're seeing ISIS and the other jihadis talking about it coming here to America, and that's our border security. Most of the folks who are coming across the border these days are not Mexicans, they're other than Mexicans. And they're not just coming from El Salvador. They're coming from all over the world. And the way we treat them is different. We let them come across the border and we don't deport them right away. We have an entire system that is wide open for threats to this country to come across our southern border and allow them to stay in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, we need someone, who has a track record, who has a history of being tough on border security, because you know what? How many folks have you elected that said they were going to secure the border, and look where we are today? Again, 10 years ago, I offered a comprehensive border security bill when it wasn't even a big issue. Why? Because I was concerned about the national security threat. But there's also another threat at our border. There's another threat on the issue of immigration. And that's the threat to hardworking men and women in this country who have seen over the last 20 years, both legal and illegal, 35 million people come into this country. 35 million people over the last 20 years, the largest amount in the history of our country, who have come into America, both legal and illegal, almost all of whom are unskilled. Do you want to know why wages have flatlined? Supply and demand, ladies and gentlemen. Supply and demand. You want to know why median income has come down? Because you have 74% of the population of America, age 18 to 65, don't have college degrees. And we brought in roughly 35 million unskilled workers to say, we're going to compete against you. And guess what's happened? Since the year 2000, there have been about 6 million net new jobs created in America. Do you know what percentage of those net new jobs are held by people who were not born in America? Answer, all of them. There's 17 million more people born, who are in the workforce, who were born in America, who don't have jobs. All the new jobs have gone to people who are willing to come in and work for. Now, I think it's important, if we're going to go out there and say we're the party of opportunity, we need not just to be the party of growth. We need to be the party of growth. You're going to be hearing from me in the next few weeks a dynamic, bold, pro-growth plan that's going to get this economy going again, reduce rates, simplify the code, get rid of the IRS, make a system that's going to create real wealth and opportunity. So we need a pro-growth message. We need to get this economy going because that's the best way to get the most people employed at all levels and sectors of the economy. Absolutely. But I wrote this book last year called Blue Collar Conservative. And I wrote it because I'm concerned that what we're seeing is a hollowing out of the middle of America. We don't like to talk about it. We're a little uneasy about talking about those things. But the reality is that middle America is struggling and suffering the most. And we better be the party that has the answer to that, because you know the other side isn't. You know what they're going to do? They're going to pay them off. They're going to say, here, we'll give you some food stamps, we'll give you a little housing, we'll give you a little this, but they're never going to give them the opportunity to provide for themselves and their family. That's what we have to do. And so we have to be a movement that is about growing this economy, but making sure that we have an economy that creates jobs for that 74% of Americans who don't have college degrees, so that they have the ability to rise and make something of themselves. Well, that's why we need to be a pro-worker party. And we need to be a pro-worker party, and it starts with immigration. 3 days ago, I published something in Breitbart News, a comprehensive, that's a bad word because it sounds like that, it sounds comprehensive immigration reform. I'm not for that. So let's say a complete proposal on how we're going to deal with legal immigration. We bring in 1,050,000 legal immigrants into this country a year, almost all of whom are unskilled. And we need to say that we need a legal immigration system that supports the American worker, and so I've called for a 25% reduction in unskilled labor coming into this country, competing against American workers. You want to get detailed. Why? because then you can hold that candidate accountable. Accountability matters. Putting stuff in rhetoric saying, oh, we're going to do all these great things. But then holding them accountable requires them to be specific. So we put a specific plan together on that. We put plans together on creating an opportunity for manufacturing. If you really want to make the ladder of opportunity reach down to those who are lower skilled workers in the economy today, then you have to take the slogan of Made in America and turn it into a reality of Made in America. And we can do it. Look at South Carolina. Look what you've done here in attracting all of these huge assembly plants and tire plants and all these other manufacturing jobs. And what has it done? It's created low rates of unemployment. It's created an opportunity for those who are lower skilled workers to rise in society. I grew up in a steel town, a mill town. That's what helps support families. That's what helps support community and churches, is to have opportunities for everybody to get that good paying job. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to be not just the majority party and win states like Pennsylvania and Ohio and Michigan and Wisconsin and others, then we have to be the party, as I say in this chapter in my book, that is for a rising tide lifting all boats, a pro-growth agenda. But us understanding this, there are millions and millions of Americans who have holes in their boats. And we need to be the party that says, we're not going to just let you sit there and just try to scoop out your boat as the tide rises. But we're going to be there to help you so you can sail to the great heights of the American dream. Ladies and gentlemen, an economic vision, a vision for safety and security for our country, and finally, we all know that our fundamental liberties are under assault in America today. We can have a strong economy, we can feel safe, but if we aren't free, if we don't have liberty, what's it all worth? In America today, for the first time in the history of our country, the most fundamental, foundational freedom that we have, the freedom of belief. You know, I see all these reporters getting all revved up about freedom of the press and freedom of speech and how important that is. It is important. Is it worth dying for? Yeah, I think it is worth dying for. But what good is freedom of speech if you can't speak what you believe? And for the first time in the history of our country, our government is trying to tell us what we can believe. Our government is to try to bully us, not to tolerance, not to going along, but to conformity. You heard in arguments just last week in the Supreme Court on the issue of marriage, how the lawyer for the government couldn't guarantee that if the justices found a new definition of marriage, that those organizations who were faith-based, churches and faith-based organizations, wouldn't lose their tax-exempt status for disagreeing with the government. That they wouldn't be singled out and isolated as bigots in society. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a key moment in American history. This is a key moment, and we need, again, someone who has a vision for what America should look like, and it's easy. It's our founder's vision. You know, Madison wrote that the First Amendment was the perfect remedy. What's that mean? Well, what's a constitution for? A constitution is, yes, to set up a government, yes. But what is a government and a constitution for? It's so we can all get along together. That's really what it's about. It's really as simple as that. Setting up a framework so we can all get along together and pursue our dreams and make society better. That's what it's about. And Madison wrote that the First Amendment was the perfect remedy to that. What's the remedy? That everyone's allowed in. Everyone's allowed to believe what they want to believe, say what they want to say. There's no right not to be offended. I know for sure there's no right not to be offended. But ladies and gentlemen, that is what makes America great. Everybody gets their say. And you know what? If you lose, at least you had a fair shot. And what they're doing now is saying, no, we're going to decide these things for you. We're not going to let the people make these decisions anymore. We're going to let these unelected judges come in here and tell us how to run our country and what to believe and what not to believe. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a moment that we are approaching. And it's time for each and every one of us. And I know you're here and you're the activists, and people say, well, you're preaching to the choir. Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the choir has to go out and sing solos. You have an opportunity in this election. You have an opportunity in this election to select somebody who's got a vision, who's got policies, and who's got a record that backs it up. South Carolina, you play a very, very key role in all this. I'll close with one little factoid. Since the convention era, in other words, when they selected nominees by convention, not by primaries and caucuses, which is really prior to the 60s. Since the convention era, the Republican Party has nominated people who have checked one of three boxes. If you haven't checked one of these three boxes, you have not been nominated by the Republican Party in the post-convention era. What are those three boxes? Number one, you were a vice president. We've nominated former vice presidents. Number two, you were the son of a former president. And number three, you came in second the last time and ran again. I know South Carolina loves tradition. I just encourage you to keep that tradition rolling. God bless you.